Ladies and gentlemen, we now get to Article 35. Article 35 is a citizen's petition that had followed the proper procedure under state law to be included on the town meeting warrant. Article 35 in the warrant and the main motion distributed in the town meeting packet use the word require, as in vote to require the Board of Selectmen to appoint a committee. It is the opinion of the chair and town council that an affirmative vote under this article would in fact be advisory. To make the motion, Mr. Greg Fishbone.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the town vote to require the Board of Selectmen to appoint a 5-member town seal committee charged with soliciting public input into the design for a new town seal, selecting from among the submissions received the design that best embodies Groton's character, history, and aspirational values, and presenting that design to a future town meeting for approval.
Article 35 has been moved and seconded. Mr. Fishbone.
I move to amend the main motion by striking it in its entirety and replacing it with the following. I move that the town vote to advise the Board of Selectmen to appoint a 5-member committee regarding issues of inclusion, tolerance, and respect in the official and unofficial symbols of the town for uses that include, but are not limited to, the marketing or branding of town services, signage for wayfinding or navigation, and promoting Groton as a cultural and recreational destination.
A motion to amend has been made. Is there a second? A motion to amend has been made and seconded. The motion reads to strike the main motion in entirety and to replace it with, I move that the town vote to advise the Board of Selectmen to appoint a 5-member committee regarding issues of inclusion, tolerance, and respect in the official and unofficial symbols of the town for uses that include, but are not limited to, the marketing or branding of town services, signage for wayfinding or navigation, and promoting Groton as a cultural and recreational destination. That motion to amend is now on the floor. Mr. Fishbone.
Okay, so this article, as it was originally moved, is a non-binding referendum requesting an advisory committee on bringing Groton's town seal into compliance with the First and 14th Amendments to the United States Constitution, on reducing potential legal and financial liability to the town, on establishing conformity with all other Massachusetts cities and towns with respect to incorporation of religious iconography into official symbols of political authority, and on respecting the unique aspects of Groton's history while acknowledging the town's status as an increasingly diverse 21st century community. The goals behind this referendum were never meant to be controversial and are not in furtherance. Seriously.
Ladies and gentlemen, please.
And they're
The
not.
chair is going to, excuse me, Mr. Fishbone, the chair is going to ask that you conduct yourselves in a respectful and courteous manner and allow the gentleman to speak uninterrupted. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The goals behind this referendum were never meant to be controversial, and they're not in furtherance of any other agenda. Town meeting, as the body tasked by the state law with approving official town seals, is the proper venue for this request, and a citizen's petition is the proper method by which issues of general concern are brought by residents to the attention of town meeting. As with every other citizen's petition to spring or fall meeting, this one has exactly 10 names attached to it. No matter how many names are collected, only the first 10 valid names are counted. Prior to the submission of this petition, its wording was vetted by dozens of additional members of Groton's community and was not deemed objectionable by anyone. However, subsequent to the filing of this petition, the town has been buried under an avalanche of misinformation as to the intent, effect, and potential costs of this humble request. To address these objections and to tamp down the rhetoric surrounding this debate, the petitioners reached out to the leadership of the opposing side of this issue with an offer to collaborate on a jointly sponsored amendment to address the concerns of both sides. That offer was rebuffed. So, the petitioners are instead reaching out to town meeting with this amendment offered in the spirit of town unity and mutual respect. First, the amendment clarifies that this motion is and always has been non-binding in its nature, and advisory in its effect. Approval of this measure would not obligate the selectmen to take any action. Likewise, the failure of this measure to advance would not prevent the selectmen from taking any action on their own. Second, the amendment no longer presupposes that a committee, if the Board of Selectmen were to form one, would recommend changes to the official town seal. The petitioners are instead asking to shift the focus of the proposed committee from any one particular outcome to more generally addressing the underlying concerns that residents have about inclusion, tolerance, and respect in the symbols of town government. Such a change would give the committee a broad menu of beneficial solutions, smaller in scope than redesigning the official seal, and tailored to the specific needs of the town. Third, the inclusion of a wider variety of less radical options would take the already speculative issue of cost entirely out of the equation. The committee would cost nothing to create. It would not be authorized to expend any town funds, and it would be able to make recommendations that could be implemented at no cost, and perhaps others whose costs would be evaluated in the budgeting and appropriations process common to all proposed expenditures. Therefore, in the interest of promoting a more productive and respectful discussion, the petitioners urge approval of this amendment.
Are you finished, Mr. Fishman? Okay.
Yes.
I'd like to call on Mr. Don Black for a presentation. The Groton Proud organization.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to think and hope that the thoughts I'm about to express are those of my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, and a chain of 13 generations of grandfathers that go before me. I hope, too, that my words and thoughts are those of you out there this evening that have a history of long ancestry here in Groton. I hope my words express the thoughts of those of you who wish to keep Groton, Groton. And I hope my words express the thoughts of the brave men and women who risked all in coming here and forming the town that we love almost 400 years ago. There are some amongst us tonight that want to introduce change. To them I say, go to hell.
Mr. Black, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to ask you to watch your language. And everyone further at this point, please. Go ahead.
My apologies, Mr. Moderator. When I say what I just said, I don't mean I want them to go there physically. But I want you to understand that Groton isn't easy. It never has been, it never was. Back in the early 1600s, we were a frontier town. We were the Wild West. The frontier did not extend any further than Groton. When the town was settled, we were nothing more than a series of paths. Those paths became trails, the trails became roads, the forests became woodlots. The woodlots became fields, and as we plowed those fields, the stones became walls, and those walls generated boundaries. And the combination of the above became the town of Groton. Unfortunately, there were those that didn't want us here. Savages attacked relentlessly. They killed, they maimed, they tortured, they hanged. They burned everything in sight, our homes, our meeting houses, our crops, our livestock, our early records. The settlers had to sleep with one eye open, holding on to their flintlock that was loaded and cocked, always in the back of their mind thinking that their next breath might well be their last. Going to or living in Groton back in those times was in fact like going to hell. Somehow we persevered, and somehow we survived, and somehow we grew strong and proud, and began to develop the thoughts that this might be the type of town and environment in which we would love to raise our families. And we grew. Farming became our mainstay. And somewhere along the way, Dr. Samuel Green designed a seal that symbolized all the good that was and is Groton. That seal is in question tonight. For there are those amongst us that take offense to its words and symbols. I'd like to take a few minutes and walk you around that seal. When I look at the seal and I read the word labor, I think of a man by the name of John Gay, who was probably the hardest working man I ever knew. He was a farmer. He was a farmer down off Route 40 in what is now Gay Road. 1915, his brother Lawrence and himself were called to war in Europe. They fought valiantly. Unfortunately, just hours before the armistice was signed, Lawrence was killed in a gas attack. John returned home to run the family farm single-handedly. And for the next 70 years, every day of his life, he stared at the south end of a northbound horse. All of his farm implements were horse-drawn. He farmed 7 days a week and farmed all the way up into his 90s, which took him into the 1970s. One day, my father said to me, "Would you go up and see John Gay? He has a project for you." And I knew that if my father was sending me off on a task, it was going to be an unpleasant one. He said, "By the way, take the backhoe." I got up there only to find that John's poor old draw horse, Chub, had passed away, and John was a farmer no more. After the burial services, John and his wife Pearl invited me into their home. It was a very modest, rustic farmhouse. But Pearl said, "John, why don't you take Don down in the basement and let him pick out some of that pickle lily in the root cellar that I made?" So down I went with John, and as you can imagine, dirt floor with planks across it, a series of light bulbs in the ceiling. John would walk ahead and he'd screw in a light bulb. It would turn on. He'd turn to me and say, "Shut the one over your head off." And he'd walk ahead a few more feet and shut the one over your head off. And we did that until we got to the root cellar, and we reversed the process coming back. John never modernized. He never had the money to do so. All of the efforts of his labor probably paid him a matter of a few cents an hour. One day he needed a new septic system. He didn't have the money to install it. And unfortunately, or fortunately, he had to sell the farm, sell the land to a developer so that he could A, install a septic system, and B, keep the home that he had grown up in. You see, labor comes at a price, and it isn't always profit. When I read the word faith, I see a word that comes in many shapes and sizes. I know we generally think of faith as a religious belief, a religious faith. But when I see the word faith up there on the seal, I think of my Uncle Charles, who was a farmer in town here for almost 95 years. On his birthday one year, he was probably in his early 90s, someone said to him, "Charlie, did you ever think of retiring?" And he said, "Oh, this time of year, I generally do think about it, but I have this faith inside me that says next year's crop could be a bumper crop of apples, peaches, pears, potatoes, corn, 3 cuttings of hay." He says, "I just can't wait to get out there." Uncle Charles passed away when he was 95, and I don't think he ever saw a bumper crop once. His dream, his faith, never realized. When I see the symbol of the horse-drawn plow, I think of my father, who in his early days was also a farmer. Unfortunately, or fortunately, he realized that being a farmer, if you love farming, you need some sort of a subsidy to help move you along and keep you profitable. 1952, he went out and he bought a brand new Dodge dump truck. He was going into the truck and tractor business. And on the side of his truck, he had his name and his phone number, and he had a replica of that plow right there on the door of his truck. I never thought much about it, but several years later, someone asked him, who he was doing a job for, "Why do you have that old horse-drawn plow on the side of your truck?" And my father said to him, without thinking, he said, "If it weren't for that plow, none of us would be here." I didn't understand it then, but I certainly do today. When I look at the seal and I see the symbol of the Holy Bible, I think of my grandmother, the most saint-like woman I have ever known, just like all of your grandmothers. My mother often said, "Your grandmother would welcome Nikita Khrushchev if he came to town," just like your grandmothers would have done. I might add, all without having a bunch of rocks strategically placed around town to tell us that we are a welcoming body. In the early settlement, there was no Amazon, there was no Kindle, there was no corner bookstore. The Bible was the one and only book that many households had. And my grandmother taught me that the Bible brought forth comfort in its words, in its passages, in its psalms, in its proverbs. But she also taught me that the Bible served another very important purpose. In it held the family records, births, deaths, marriages. The entire family tree was in its centerfold. You couldn't trust town records. Actually, there were none way back in those days. Most of them had been burned, destroyed, flooded out, you name it. It was the home Bible in which the records of the day prevailed. My grandmother showed me all this, and she said, "One day this responsibility is going to fall upon your shoulders. Don't let us down." Our family Bible, the one of which I speak, was yay thick, and it spent several hundred years in Groton and currently resides in the Peabody Essex Museum. The last entry was in 1966, citing the death of my grandmother. There is a packet in the back of the packet, there was a conversation that addresses Article 35. And in it says, "Town meeting may very well choose not to address the town seal's issues this year, but these issues are not going away on their own. Over time, they will come to cause division, dissent, and liability until they are ultimately resolved." That to me sounds like a threat. Your vote on Article 35, it goes on to say, will not change the seal. Your vote on Article 35 will not save our seal. Your vote on Article 35 will not resolve the issues that plague our seal. Your vote will only dictate whether we start a conversation now or put it off till later. I'm not sure I concur. Sometime this evening, hopefully soon, we will vote on this issue. And when we do, I ask you to do something we have never done at town meeting before as long as I remember. And I ask you to do this not for me, not for yourselves, but out of honor and respect for those who sacrifice so much. Families like the Bloods, the Prescotts, the Chamberlains, the Longleys, the Nuttings, and the Winthrops, and so many other families. When the moderator calls for the vote, I would ask you tonight to rise to your feet as one. He will call and he'll hear the yes vote. But when he calls for those opposed, let us hear a no vote like we have never heard before. Let us shake the girders and rattle the walls of this auditorium, and let us send a message. Let us not just defeat this article, let us bury this article right here, right now, tonight. We love our seal. We want to keep our seal today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, on into eternity. Faith and labor, everyone.
Point of order?
Quiet, please. Quiet, please. You should have a point of order, Mr. Fishman.
Mr. Moderator, I had made an amendment, a motion for an amendment.
We already have one amendment on the floor. Are you looking to amend your amendment, or you're looking to amend?
I had thought that we would discuss the amendment rather than the article that was being amended.
We are discussing the motion to amend.
Okay, because I'm confused, because I was calling for respect.
But the chair will allow, we have not decided on the motion to amend yet. The chair will allow discussion on both the main motion on the floor and the proposed motion to amend simultaneously.
It's because it seemed as if the amendment had just never even happened. Did it not?
Well, Mr. Black had his comments, and now do you have anything to say in rebuttal to that?
I was calling for respect, and I was told to go to hell.
And the gentleman was called out of order.
I was calling for inclusion, and I was told some families are more important than others. I was calling for, yes. I was calling for.
Let him speak, please.
Tolerance. And I don't believe that I've gotten that either. So that I can see something important about this town, and its character will be decided tonight, one way or the other, and people will have to think hard about that.
Ladies and gentlemen, the town meeting time moderator's handbook, which you should all be familiar with, right here. I'd like to read you a sentence from it. It says, quote, the consequences of a measure may be reprobated in strong terms, but to arraign the motives of its advocates is against order, even though no names are mentioned. Reprobate is an arcane word for expressing disapproval. Every voter recognized tonight is entitled to debate the pros and cons of the question on the floor. But it is out of order to discuss both the individuals and the motives on either side of this debate. And further, foul language will not be tolerated. If that is clear, I will call on Mr. Easom, who has a committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. At the Sustainability Commission's meeting on 18 April 2017, the Commission voted unanimously to support Article 35. The Sustainability Commission supports this article in that we believe it will foster a healthy discussion of our community's values. It is important to the town and the people who live in it to participate in a healthy debate of this important issue related to the identity as a community. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I will now open it to the floor with the instruction that while you have a main motion on the floor, you also have a motion to amend. Discussion will be allowed on either. I'll start down front. Yes, sir. Mr. Hargraves.
Here I have a letter from Representative Harrington that she asked me to read tonight. After listening to Mr. Black, I am able to perhaps abbreviate at least the first part of it regarding the history of the seal. But it gives me a great deal of pleasure to represent our representative. And I want to just start out this way to say that, however, by the time Dr. Samuel Green designed the seal for adoption of Groton, there certainly was the Constitution and all its protections, which we did not have before. The same hardships suffered by our early settlers were no longer a threat, but the residents of the town of Groton were no strangers to devastating loss and struggle, as they had just experienced tremendous loss and hardship arising from the great Civil War in this country. We may never know, but we do know that the timing of the adoption of this seal was preceded by a great loss to the town of Groton and this country. This part of Groton's history is well documented. History is a funny thing. We can read it, we can appreciate it, we can hate it, and we can love it, or we can learn from it. But we cannot change it. The only thing we have the capacity to change is our future. We shouldn't try to erase or deny our history, but it is what it is. What we should be focused on is our future. What we should be mindful of is that we need to help each other in our town when hardship arises. What we need to take from our forefathers is the determination and the perseverance to overcome the adversity and hardship when they arise. We need to make sure that the legacy of our forefathers is a strong and united town, respectful and tolerant of diverse cultures, faiths, and principles. Simply, we need to make sure Groton was worth the pain and suffering they endured to ensure its very existence. For many then, as many know now, faith was integral to their ability to endure. This part of our history and this part of their legacy, as our town will celebrate its 400th anniversary in less than 40 years, we should honor the sacrifices of our early settlers as our more contemporary forefathers did in the late 1800s by maintaining this field. James Baldwin, an African-American novelist, essayist, playwright, poet, and social critic once said, "Know from whence you came. If you know from whence you came, there's absolutely no limitations to where you can go." And it's been said earlier, we cannot change this history, but I do feel that it's incumbent upon us to preserve our history. On the cover page of Samuel Green's book, he spoke the words, I feel bear repeating. He said, "Gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost." This seal of the town of Groton is simply a fragment of our history that remains. We should hold it, we should preserve it, so that our history will not be lost. Thank you for your indulgence. Respectfully submitted, Sheila C. Harrington, State Representative.
Ladies and gentlemen, the chair allowed the statement from the representative because she's in Boston representing the town and cannot be here tonight. Also unable to be here tonight was Mr. Deegan, who also asked that a statement be read. And I believe, Mr. Petropoulos, you have that.
I'll read this for Mr. Deegan, who could not be here and who prepared this statement based on his understanding of the original article. I believe it still has relevance. I wish that the proponents for this citizen's petition had come to the selectmen and requested that we appoint the proposed committee rather than bringing it to town meeting. Alas, this is the route they chose. With that said, I see no harm in having a committee appointed to study the current town seal. Your vote tonight will not allow the seal to be changed. None of us even know if any changes will be proposed. Should this committee bring forward any proposed changes, then those will need to be brought back to a future town meeting for approval. That is the time to voice your feelings on whether it should stay as is or change, if requested. A yes vote on this article allows for study and contemplation of an issue that's worthy of review. A no vote slams the door shut without any discourse. Therefore, while many of you folks sitting in attendance may be apprehensive to a change, your support will show that you are remaining open-minded while a committee studies the situation. Had I been there tonight, I would be in favor of this article. Josh Deegan.
Go over here. Yes, ma'am.
Carrie Nealand, Anthony Drive, Groton. I was considering a motion to amend Article 35, but instead I am making an appeal and a challenge. The appeal is to all tonight at this meeting to vote no on forming a committee to consider changing the town seal, so that those that brought forward this, oh, by the way, I apologize to Mr. Fishbone and the 10 people, even though I disagree with I just wanted to apologize for what was said. so that those that brought forward this article would be challenged to come back to the whole town with a ballot initiative question that would better represent the whole town. Statements have been made as to how the seal was established, but the fact remains that none of us were there 119 years ago, and we can only make inferences about what they were thinking at the time. As to the constitutional legality of our seal, I quote from In God We Trust on money.com, appeals courts have consistently held that such traditional, patriotic, or ceremonial words do not amount to governmental sponsorship of a religious exercise or the establishment of religion. In all respects, it has been an important and now indispensable thread in the fabric of America's national life, end quote. The beautiful seal of Groton continues to be and has been an important and now indispensable thread in the fabric of Groton's local life and history. Let's bring it to the whole town on a ballot question.
In the back, yes, sir.
Oldham Lathrop, Sunset Road. I move the question.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is the prerogative of the chair whether or not to accept a motion that has been proposed. The chair believes it is too early for that motion and would rather have debate continue. It's down front, yes, sir.
Dear Grotonians, as your selectman, I urge you to vote no on this article. If such a group is created, it will use our time and money, and we have neither to spare. There's nothing broken here. There's no challenge that must be resolved today. How does a study on our seal take priority of the Senior Center, the fate of Prescott, Four Corners Sewer Project, the review and implementation of the municipal audit, discovering regionalization opportunities, and the creation of a strategic governance plan? We've been told that there doesn't have to be any cost to the town as a result of the vote tonight. I dispute that. I ask town meeting to consider the resources used during the work of such a committee. Time spent by our town manager, our executive assistant, our police and fire chiefs, our DPW director and IT director. Taxpayer hours that they would have to spend to assist such a committee, and thus, time that they cannot use for more important endeavors. Dear neighbors, as a private citizen, I urge you to vote no on this article. When I moved my family here to Groton, I didn't care that this town had a seal. I was drawn to Groton and have remained here because of Groton's community, the Woodlands character, our values, and Groton's history. I was drawn here by the schools and because I truly believed this is an amazing place to raise children, and I was right. This is one of the greatest places in the United States of America, and I am saying that even though it snows for 6 months on end and winter lasts far too long. You see, the most basic idea is that I made a choice to move to Groton. When I made that choice, I accepted Groton for all that it was, for all that it is, and for all that it might become. I probably didn't notice our town seal, but I certainly do now. And you know what? Some might think that it should bother me. Some might tell me that it's not inclusive, but I know that they are wrong. You see, I don't own any Bibles, and my faith is different than our founding families. But I would never consider try to modify Groton's town seal. To me, that would be like moving to Switzerland and asking my local town to eliminate watches and chocolate. I have respect for what came before us, for what has made this town an incredible place to live. I honor the past for all of its troubles and its challenges. After all, I would not be here today if it were not for those people whom Groton's seal represents. I understand that the seal isn't the most artistic work, but it is still our seal. And just like the American flag, I feel patriotic duty to defend the seal because this is my home. To me, the meaning isn't in the symbols on the seal. No, the seal is a symbol, the symbol of our town. As a private citizen, I'm aware of how much Groton is already changing. Here's something we can keep the same, to honor what Groton once was, to embrace what Groton will become. Please vote no on this article. As a selectman, I ask you not to expend Groton's resources. Neither volunteer hours nor taxpayer funds should be used to consider such a change. Figuring out if we want to change our town seal just isn't important right now. You elected me to give guidance and provide leadership. So here, now, tonight, listen to me. Please vote no on this article.
Ladies and gentlemen, the chair is going to endeavor not only to have a full debate, but a fair debate. And there's been perhaps a few more against than for. So I would ask the folks at the microphone or in line, is there anyone who is for this who wishes to speak? So I'll go with the woman in back and then down front. Go ahead, ma'am.
I'm a farmer in Groton. I live in a house that was built in 1777, and I believe Mr. Black's family lived there for a time. I am proud of being from Groton. When my great-great-great-great-grandmothers came across on the Mayflower, they were not afraid of change. When they traded in the Union Jack for 13 stars, they were not afraid of change. When they sent their sons to the Civil War, they were not afraid of change. When they added stars to that flag, they were not afraid of the change in that symbol, only the enlargement of our nation. When my foremothers fought for the vote, they were not afraid of change. And I, living in Groton now, am not afraid of change. And what I'm afraid of least of all is a committee. I've been bored by committees, I've worked hard on committees, I've been tired by committees, but I've never been afraid of a committee. We are brave Grotonites. I'm sure we can manage not to be afraid of a committee. Now, our symbols are important. We should think about them, we should debate them, we should love them. They should represent us. Why not have a committee to see if the things in our town that make sense to us are on that seal? That's what I'm teaching my daughter here in Groton, to fight for what you believe in, to show up for the committee, and to include who you can, and to change in ways that make our nation better. Thank you.
Yes, down front.
Hi, Deborah Santoro, Radon Road. I'd first like to apologize to Josh Deegan and the selectmen when we signed this petition. I think we didn't realize we could just approach the selectmen and talk to them first. We might have done that. We were a little naive, and I apologize. When I signed the petition to update our town seal, it seemed obvious to me that the presence of the Bible on the town seal was incongruous. The First Amendment's Establishment Clause prohibits the government from making any law respecting an establishment of religion, and that clause not only forbids the government from establishing an official religion, but also prohibits government from actions that unduly favor one religion over another. A side note is I'd like to just remind Mr. Black, there were people that lived here before your people, and although they're not here to represent themselves, they existed. They were here first. I'm no historian, but I'd like to cite our founding father, Thomas Jefferson, who wrote in a letter to the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut, who were experiencing a certain level of religious persecution in that state, that there should be a wall of separation between church and state. He wrote, "Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legislative powers of government reach actions only and not opinions. I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people, which declared that their legislature would make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. The purpose of the town seal is to authenticate and legitimize any paper or document emanating from any officer or board of a town. The presence of the Holy Bible on our seal gives the impression that Christianity is the favored religion in our community, that not just the town of Groton, but the Holy Bible itself authenticates our legal documents. Although I come from a Christian background and I honor the Bible, it doesn't represent all of our people, and its presence on the seal violates that wall that Thomas Jefferson believed should exist. Since the role of this petition request is advisory only, as town meeting may not require the selectmen to set up this committee, I suggest that the opponents of this petition do not wish to hear our arguments that the presence is problematic. I suggest that they, in most undemocratic fashion, wish to shut down the discussion. so that all of our voices would not be heard. And I ask everyone here to consider that this petition represents a request to begin a discussion. Your yes vote does not change the seal, but it appoints a committee to discuss it. We're just asking for open and honest discussion for a seal and symbology that represents all of our people. Thank you.
In the back, yes, ma'am, to my left.
I would be in favor of one of these two articles. I think that it makes sense for people to, and I prefer Mr. Fishman's because it's more specific about being inclusive and looking more broadly. I do not see a disadvantage having people look into something. Yes, it might use a tiny bit of town time. Not so clear it's going to use a lot of town time. And not doing this, I don't think is going to make any of those other committees move forward faster. The other thing is, you might give some thought to the fact that the people in the South really feel that the Confederate flag represents their history, and they want to keep it. So just give that a thought. And the other thing is, I think there's very little hope that we will ever change the seal, but if we do or don't, I think it should be a town-wide ballot and not what a few people here tonight who feel impassioned have to say about it. Here's one other thing. The reason I don't think it's very likely we ever will is because I saw what happened with the Crusader issue. And the town liked their Crusader team, and we kept it over all the objections of many people who found it inherently very offensive. So I hope maybe people take some of these things to heart and the things that other people have said and keep an open mind and allow the town to make a decision, not the few people here.
I'm going to go next to the gentleman who is behind her because he yielded his space. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Curtis Schultz, 43 West Main Street. Thank you for turning that down. You want to write that down, Curtis Schultz, 43 West Main Street, because I want to invite all the people who want to propose this article out to dinner. All right, come over. I want to talk. All right, I had a lot that I have notes here about establishment and heritage and lawsuits that could definitely be coming. But the most important thing for me is that Christ is represented correctly. That is everything to me. Christianity is not dependent upon Scripture being on the town seal. Christianity is dependent on loving your neighbor and showing Christ to people. That's the most important thing. And I know that many people agree with that. We see the heritage of it. Actually, you see a lot of signs around town that say, love your neighbor. I don't know anything about their beliefs, but I know where they got that quote. But that's what I want to live out. And so to anybody who wants this seal changed, I want you to come over. Personally, I love Scripture. I love it. It's definitely my lifeblood. It is definitely everything that makes me move. But it is something that moves me to love you. Not hate you, not tell you I don't want to talk to you. So please write that down. Curtis Schultz, 43 West Main Street, apartment number 2. My name is on the mailbox. Come on over. I'd love to talk to you or take you out to dinner.
In the back, yes, ma'am.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Elena Gavazzi, 16 Lawrence Drive. I apologize that I'm not dressed in my traditional Prudence Wright, the female patriot who rescued the bridge in 1775. I also give burial ground tours to the 5th graders every spring. I've got the 15th and 16th, I believe, scheduled this year, where I go into the old burial ground and really know the people who originated this town. I also helped Deborah Beale Normandin map out all the veterans' graves from the Revolutionary War soldiers, the War of 1812, the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, thank you, and even the Gulf War. We're working on maps and areas of people where they're buried. And, you know, I'm not prepared for this because there's been a lot of rhetoric, and usually I speak from my heart when I deal with the students because I'm extremely honest. But I was watching this on television, and I know there's great divide about it, and I came to Groton with my husband and 3 children in 1992. My husband just retired after 28 years in the United States military. We came from Fort Devens. And when we first moved here in 1992, my daughter was attending Miss Maria's School of Dance, which was located in Air, and she had her first recital here, and we came from Fort Devens and drove over the bridge through Shirley and saw the little green store and the little post office and fell in love with the town. And we wanted to live here. So when we got out in 1992, this is where we said we're going to put down our roots. And it wasn't easy. We live in West Groton, and we were told pretty quickly we weren't wanted at that time because it was conservation land and they didn't want growth, and we held in there. But in 1996, when my son had a life-threatening emergency, and we almost lost him, and it was the school system here that came to our assistance. But I had to take my energies elsewhere. I'm a historical researcher by profession, and I started out checking out all the local cemeteries. First started in Pepperell, and then worked to Shirley and Groton, and so I really know the people that began this town, including Mr. Black's family. But I'm very, very, very well familiar with Dr. Samuel Green, and I would be guilty if I did not come here and speak with his voice tonight. You know, he didn't have to create the volumes and papers that he did about the town of Groton. Yes, he was born here. Yes, he was a librarian in Boston, but his family was here generationally. We're going to drive by the streets that have Tarbell, Lawrence, other names from the family. Yes, I see the flag, and I'm not even quite sure what that means, but I'll spin it up. But
There is a 3-minute time limit.
I was torn about this because I am a newcomer, granted, from 1992. But that seal represents every person that's buried in the old burial ground, and many of them that are buried in the cemetery on Chicopee Road. So, that being said, if we change the seal that was designed by Mr. Samuel Green, whose ancestors created this town, it's going to take a piece of my heart away because it's messing with so many different things on so many different levels. And that's all. Just don't make a rash decision on change, please. Thank you.
Down front, yes, sir.
I'm in favor of keeping our town seal. It means more now than it did before. I'm Val Prest, Highland Road, Groton, Mass. As per the newspaper article by Ann O'Connor, the seal was created by Samuel Green, and you've heard about this earlier, in the last half of the 1800s. It reflects the character of the town of Groton's inhabitants. The town was created in 1655, some 200 years earlier. Also, to quote a newspaper editorial, does the Bible and plow reject newcomers to Groton, or simply reflect the historical roots of the town? Why do you suppose the Bible is on our seal? Was it just a pretty picture, or did it stand for something real? Do you think that Samuel Green would create a seal that did not stand for something real? Does it really reflect a belief that no longer exists? Was it because people were learned in the Christian teachings, or was it because they experienced the power of Christ in their daily living, or both? People had to struggle with safely raising families. You heard about that earlier. Creating farmland to plant and grow food and feed their animals and protect themselves against hostile Indians and robbers. in order to survive. Didn't they depend on each other, their neighbors, for mutual help? Like, for instance, the neighborhood joint efforts at barn raising. God taught us to love one another, and thus the people reached out to one another for mutual help and protection and created laws in accordance with that. Like our national constitution, we had Christian-based laws that worked well because God's love was at its foundation. It was wisely written for freedom of religion, not for freedom from religion. They learned all that from the Bible and their Christian friends and practiced it. They truly experienced God was with them. Their struggles were local but absolutely real and thus mutually surmountable with the grace of God. Hence, the Bible influenced the creation of that seal. People experienced his love and guidance and knew the power of God. Today, you and I have bigger issues. They're both local, national, and international, and very threatening. Though plowing is now done differently than the symbol shows, it's still valid. People now are in more need of the teachings and practices of Jesus Christ to mutually work together in love and effort. Therefore, the Bible is far more important now than it was back then. Our seal is thus representing our needs now, even more than back when it was created. Our seal is simple, yet more real and modern than we realize. It does not reject newcomers. It makes Groton more inclusive. I say no on the creation of this committee and keep our seal as it is. Thank you.
Mr. Petropoulos.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to start by saying I support this article. I understand the concerns that those who advance it have and the simple request that they've made of us. It is a simple and innocent request. I think these are reasonable issues brought forward by reasonable people in the most democratic of ways. They come to us in our democratic forum here and ask us to consider something as a community. These are members of our community asking other members to listen. There's a little bit of animosity here. We're not unusual. It should be expected. You can see what's happening in New Orleans, where there are armed guards required, and the people who are dismantling symbols of the Confederacy have to be anonymized in order to do the work. We're not at that point here. We're actually a little further down that road than I thought we'd be, but we're not at that point. But I think some of the things that were said are actually not in the spirit in which this article was submitted. And they're not in keeping with the lessons of the very symbol that those who object to this article hold dear. Let's keep that in mind. The seal represents us all. It's reasonable to expect us all to be represented by it. Let's use this article as an opportunity to see if we can make that happen. There's no guarantee that it'll happen, but let's try. Let's do that with a commitment to be proud of how we decided it. That we decided it as a community, regardless of what we end up deciding. And I'd certainly like to encourage those who advance this not to go anywhere, but to be here tomorrow and to carry on as members of our community, continuing their efforts together to make it great. Thank you.
In the back, yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for allowing the debate to continue. My name is Jack Sabal, and I want to say my appreciation. I would like to also vote opposed to this article for the citizens petition. But I wanted to say thank you to my good friend Don Black, who was very articulate in how he feels, represents, in my opinion, the opinion of a lot of people who are from Groton or have family from Groton. My only regret is that you stole my thunder for a couple of things, but I'll forgive you for that. It was suggested when this article was presented that it's simple and straightforward, as Mr. Petropoulos just mentioned, and that there are no other agendas except for the kindness and open-mindedness of those who support this. I suspect otherwise, because although they say that there's no other agenda, at the back of your packet, they begin their conversation with making a reference to the citizens' petition inspired by the article proposing a set of granite monuments to be labeled All Are Welcome. So it's not disconnected but connected. And by connecting them, it shows that these people have some ideas they want to share. And although that article did pass last week, or the last meeting, other articles passed as well that showed not inclusiveness, not including medical marijuana. No other discussion, just didn't want to include them. Not including or holding a moratorium on marijuana. Not inclusive. So it's only inclusive if certain people want it to be inclusive. But at any rate, the comments that I would like to have or share with you is referring to that packet that was passed out, that nothing in that, quote, conversation justifies the need to change the town seal. It only expresses personal opinions, makes references to supposed long-standing concerns of the current design, and includes numerous innuendos about its constitutionality. But to that, I suggest the following. Groton itself has an interesting and unique history, one to be proud of if your roots are from Groton. Groton began by uniting its people in the wilderness with a common goal of survival, symbolized on the town seal. Like it or not, that is our history. And that becomes especially important to those who call it home and are called upon to defend it, serving the military. Some volunteered, some were drafted, but went on deployment to all parts of the world. And being from Groton, Groton was their home, and at times their only point of sanity in a sometimes unbelievably crazy world. Referring again to the enclosed conversation packet, the vote on Article 35 will not change the seal. The vote on Article 35 will not save the seal. And I paraphrase here, if we vote to defeat Article 35 tonight, they'll just keep on trying. That is why, in my humble opinion, as a lifelong resident of Groton, a 30-year veteran of the Groton Police Department, retiring as a captain, wearing the town seal the whole time, volunteering my time, putting yourself out there, running for election and serving 2 terms as a selectman, that it's important that we should vote to defeat Article 35, both the original article and the article as amended. Thank you.
Mr. Fishbone? And to give you a chance to respond.
Okay, well, we submitted the amendment so that we wouldn't have to talk about the Bible and the seal and all the things that would be so contentious. And I would like to specifically address Mr. Curtis Schultz of 43 West Main Street, number 2. We'll be in touch. And I had prepared to talk about the Bible and about my faith and about an experience I had in town that really made me feel that the seal was inappropriate, it needed to be changed. And it happened one Saturday a few years back at the transfer station. And I was there, I was doing the weekly recycling and transferring, and sort of a mindless activity, sort of going through the motions of 3 kinds of glass and 4 kinds of plastic and 2 kinds of metal and paper and cardboard, and driving up the slope and getting out of the car and going to put my orange bag into the big trailer full of orange bags of garbage. And I kind of looked down and I kind of looked back, and I saw a Bible on a garbage bag. And I had to look back again because I hadn't realized that the town seal had a Bible until I saw it in the garbage. And it struck me as perhaps inappropriate and disrespectful, and it made me realize that the Bible is a powerful symbol. It is a symbol that has its own life and its own meaning, and when you try to put it into a seal that's used to tell us which garbage bags we're allowed to use, it makes the seal inappropriate for many uses. And it really struck me as something that the town is requiring us to do. To every week I have to put my garbage in this bag that's labeled with a Bible and toss it in the trash. And it's not my book, but I was raised to respect all scriptures, and it gives me a queasy feeling when I do it. So that was really what struck in the back of my mind as someday, eventually, someone is probably going to have to do something about this, so that we have a symbol that means the town of Groton, and doesn't have such a life and such a meaning outside the seal that it overwhelms the intention and meaning of the symbol as a unifying force for all people.
I'm going to go with the folks in the back who've been very patient, and then we'll come down to you, Mr. Cunningham. Yes, sir, in the back.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jim Brennan, Old Lantern Lane. You won't find these words in the original amendment or the revised article, but what some petitioners and their supporters have said in their tag post is that the Bible and our town seal makes Groton unwelcoming. And for some of us, I'll speak for myself, that feels very unwelcoming. Our town seal is not a seal of approval on how to live or what to believe. Our town seal neither prevents nor compels, for that matter, our being kind and welcoming to one another. You find that in your heart, not in your town seal. Our town seal hasn't stopped Groton from having an interfaith council whose mission is to foster understanding, respect, justice, and peace among people of a variety of religious traditions through worship, fellowship, education, and service. That comes from their mission statement. Our town seal has not stopped Groton from having a church in the center of town, one of our most prominent historic landmarks, known for respecting diversity of opinion and belief, a church that proudly rings a Paul Revere bell and flies a rainbow flag, proclaiming that all are indeed welcome. Our town seal has not stopped Groton from building a sukkah on Main Street, and if memory serves, one of our white steepled churches offered its front lawn for construction. Our town seal has not stopped the Groton Library from offering programs to foster a better understanding of Islam at a time when Muslims across the country are feeling particularly vulnerable. We, the people of Groton, are not perfect, but I think we get a lot of things right. I voted for the welcome markers, but we don't really need boulders to tell us how to behave. And we certainly don't need to spend $77,000 to destroy a piece of Groton history.
Down, Mr. Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I am not in favor of this main motion or with the amendment, and I would observe, I think, if one of the moments that I guess galvanized Mr. Fishbone was a moment at the transfer station, your concern is probably better addressed, I think, to the recycling committee about the seal being included in the bags. That's something they could probably address. But I think more fundamentally...
Let him speak, please.
I apologize if that's out of order. But I think more fundamentally, I think we need to focus on how we act to one another as residents, and it's not as much in the symbolism. I would sincerely hope that somebody's faith or their core beliefs are not threatened by our seal as it currently exists, to the extent that they would not be welcoming or reach out or find some other vehicle within our town. There are many, many opportunities, volunteer service, to reach out and to help others and to be welcoming to others and to be inclusive to others. And I think those are the things that are critically important. Not the symbol of a seal, which has its roots really in history. That does not need to define how we act to our neighbors or how we act to one another. That comes from inside. And I think this is attempting to waste a lot of time and energy in something like this is not productive, and in fact is more divisive and sets us apart, and I do not support it. Thank you.
In the back, yes, sir.
Yes, I have 3 quick points. First, on the comparison to the Confederate flag, that's misinformed. The Confederate flag became a hot issue down south in 1962 when Fritz Holland raised it on top of the South Carolina Capitol during the Civil Rights Movement. Okay, that's when it became an issue. This is completely different. Second point, they say it's just a committee. Well, I kind of liken that to an unsolicited sales call, no obligation. Well, I usually hang up on those people. The third thing is, with respect to the amendment, it started out with just a seal. The amendment makes it more broad. And I asked, what else would they want to change? The Crusader name. That's obviously been brought up before. Streets, Gibbet Hill. How about the Penny Project out here that is for Jewish children only? It does not address the gays or handicapped kids that were killed during the Holocaust. Should we remove that if we're really looking at separation of church and state? Should we stop teaching our kids the dreidel, spinning the dreidel and the Hanukkah songs? I personally don't want to, but if we're going to make the First Amendment argument, I say it all goes. And I don't really want to have that. It's a slippery slope, folks.
Okay, down front.
So I think it's a point of order that the amendment changes the article significantly, right? It's not a trivial change. It's well-intentioned and all that, and I definitely appreciate the amendment, actually. But I think, does it keep us within the warrant?
Within the scope of the warrant. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the chair reviewed the motion to amend prior to the meeting. And the chair's reading of the warrant article on Article 35 is that it contemplates the formation of a committee advising the selectmen to form a committee to review issues relating to the town seal. In that way, the chair has ruled that the amendment is within the scope of the article and is properly before the meeting. It will be the meeting's decision whether or not to accept that amendment. In the back, yes, sir. You, sir, yep.
My name's Adam Burnett on Gratuity Road, and I just want to mention that when the term savage was used, that to me was offensive in that the town was actually inhabited by people for thousands of years, and we're only talking a history of 400, or less than 400, in which we've rewritten history, essentially. And all I want to say is that gives me the sense that we aren't as being inclusive to Native Americans. And I just think everyone has to just think about what they're saying and realize that perhaps they aren't really including everyone. And we just have to be careful about terms like savages when those people were just trying to live here as well several hundred years ago. And secondly, could a committee just be formed on its own without the consent of this body, or could the selectmen just do that on their own and have the committee just do something for it and then provide a recommendation to the selectmen? Thank you.
Mr. Petropoulos, would you like to address that question?
believe that as a matter of fact, yes, the selectmen could form a committee to do that or any number of other objectives.
In the back here, yes, sir.
Jim Leonard, Fairway Drive. I'd like to make just one argument. It's clear that there are passions on many sides here. I would like to encourage you not to use force to resolve differences. Let's not force people to accept your view. When there are opposing views, it's helpful to talk and to listen and to see if there is a resolution that meets the most important needs of all the people involved. I believe that a committee here to talk this through would be a healthy thing for Groton to have. There are passions. There are people who feel strongly. It would be good to have their opinions heard and to see if they can be satisfied without offending people on the other side. So I encourage you to approve this and to let the discussion happen under official aegis and see what comes out of it before you vote on yes or no, you want changes. Thank you.
In the back, yes, ma'am.
Michelle Collette on behalf of Miss Ellen.
Oh, we have a voter using the wireless mic, Miss Ellen.
Point of order.
Yes.
May I move both the amendment and the,
Yes, a motion to move the question may be applied to both the motion to amend and the eventual main motion.
okay, then I move them, please.
A motion has been made and seconded to move the question on both the amendment, the proposed amendment, and then the eventual main motion. A motion to amend suppresses debate, requires a 2/3 vote. If you vote in favor of the motion to move the question, we will move straight to voting. If you vote against it, debate will continue. All those in favor of the motion to move the question signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The ayes have it. A 2/3 majority was achieved. The motion to move the question has passed. Ladies and gentlemen, before you is first an amendment, a proposed amendment. Once we have voted on that to decide what the final form of the main motion will be, we will then vote on the main motion. Both will require a majority vote. I will read the proposed amendment. It is to replace the original main motion and replace it with the words, I move that the town vote to advise the Board of Selectmen to appoint a 5-member committee regarding issues of inclusion, tolerance, and respect in the official and unofficial symbols of the town for uses that include but are not limited to the marketing or branding of town services, signage for wayfinding or navigation, and promoting Groton as a cultural and recreational destination. If you vote in favor of the proposed amendment, that will then become the main motion. If you vote against it, we will stick with the main motion that was originally read. All in favor of the motion to amend signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. The noes have it. The amendment fails. Ladies and gentlemen, the main motion before you reads, I move that the town vote to require the Board of Selectmen to appoint a 5-member town seal committee charged with soliciting public input into the design for a new town seal, selecting among other submissions received the design that best embodies Groton's character, history, and aspirational values, and presenting that design to a future town meeting for approval. All in favor of the main motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. The noes have it. The motion fails by a majority vote. Article 36 through 41 is a consent agenda. Mr. Petropoulos.